You think the world is neatly divided into continents, countries, and cities, but then you stumble upon facts that make you question everything. Like, did you know there's a country following a calendar that's years behind the rest of the world? Or that there's a place on Earth where no one has built a single bridge across a river that stretches for thousands of miles? I am sure no. And trust me, by the end of this list, you'll be questioning reality. 1. Bangladesh has the highest population density of any country. Alright, let's start with Bangladesh. It is a country that's absolutely packed with people. With over 170 million people crammed into an area smaller than the state of Illinois, Bangladesh has the highest population density of any country not named Monaco or Singapore. If the United States had the same population density as Bangladesh, it would have 4.5 billion people living in it. Yep, you read that right. Makes rush hour traffic in your city seem like a dream, doesn't it? 2. New York City's population is bigger than 12 entire U.S. states. New York City is massive with a population of over 8.5 million people. That's more than the entire population of 12 U.S. states, including Montana, Wyoming, Vermont, and Alaska combined. Despite being packed with millions of people, NYC somehow still has empty subway seats at 3 a.m., but good luck finding one during rush hour. 3. The Philippines has over 7,640 islands and counting. If someone asked you how many islands the Philippines has, you'd probably say, a lot. And you'd be right. The official number is 7,640, but that number keeps changing. New islands appear due to volcanic activity, while others disappear due to erosion. So if you ever want to visit all the islands in the Philippines, you better start now. 4. New Zealand used to be 9 times bigger, but most of it sank. Imagine being so big and then just sinking. That's what happened to Zealandia, the mostly submerged continent where New Zealand sits. At one point, New Zealand was part of a landmass nearly the size of India. But over millions of years, most of it disappeared under the ocean, leaving behind only New Zealand and a few tiny islands. So yeah, New Zealand is just the tip of a massive sunken world. 5. The Nile River flows northward. Because why not? Most rivers tend to flow south, following the natural downward slope of the Earth. But the Nile River? It's different. This legendary river, the longest in the world, flows northward from East Africa into the Mediterranean Sea. It defies expectations and makes you wonder how? Well, the simple answer is that the land in Central Africa is higher than the land near the Mediterranean, so water naturally flows downhill, even if that means going north. 6. Alaska and Russia are closer than you think. At their closest point, Alaska and Russia are only 2.4 miles, 3.8 kilometers, apart, thanks to the Diomede Islands in the Bering Strait. Big Diomede, Russia, and Little Diomede, USA, sit almost side by side, separated by just a short stretch of water. However, if you're measuring from mainland Alaska to mainland Russia, the distance is about 55 miles, 88 kilometers, across the Bering Strait. So while you can't quite see Russia from your backyard, the two countries are a lot closer than most people realize. 7. The Amazon River has no bridges at all. The Amazon River stretches over 4,345 miles, making it the second longest river in the world. And yet not a single bridge crosses it. This is because most of the river runs through the dense Amazon rainforest, where there are barely any roads, let alone infrastructure for massive bridges. People just travel by boats and ferries instead. It's the ultimate example of nature saying, "No roads allowed." 8. The Eye of the Sahara looks like a giant alien symbol. In the middle of the Sahara Desert, there's a giant, perfectly circular geological structure called the Richat structure. It is also known as the Eye of the Sahara. It's so big that astronauts use it as a landmark from space, but scientists still don't know exactly how it formed. Some think it's the remains of a volcano, while others believe it's an impact crater. Either way, it looks too perfect to be natural. 9. The northern lights only appear in certain places, and science still can't fully explain them. The aurora borealis, Northern Lights, and Aurora Australis, Southern Lights, are some of the most stunning natural light shows on Earth. These glowing, dancing waves of color happen when charged particles from the sun collide with Earth's atmosphere. But even though we have a general idea of why they happen, scientists still don't fully understand the details. 10th, Surtsey Island. Was born in 1963 and nobody can visit it. But why? Off the coast of Iceland, a brand new island was formed in 1963 due to a volcanic eruption. They named it Surtsey. What's actually weird is that scientists banned human visitors from the island to study how ecosystems develop from scratch. Only a few researchers are allowed to go there. 11th. Ethiopia's calendar is 7 to 8 years behind the rest of the world. If you visit Ethiopia, you'll technically be in a different year. Ethiopia follows its own unique calendar, which is about 7 to 8 years behind the Gregorian calendar used by most of the world. So right now, while the rest of the world is in 2025, Ethiopia is still in 2017. Time travel? Sort of. 12. The African continent is splitting in two. Africa is literally ripping apart due to shifting tectonic plates. Over millions of years, a new ocean will form, and the eastern part of Africa will separate from the rest of the continent. Scientists are already seeing massive cracks forming in places like Ethiopia and Kenya. Nature is basically rearranging the map in slow motion. 13. Venice is slowly sinking and no one can stop it. Venice, Italy, the famous floating city with its beautiful canals, gondolas, and old architecture is actually sinking. Ain't that sad? Every year, Venice drops by about 1 to 2 millimeters, and the water levels around it keep rising due to climate change. Some experts predict that by 2100, much of Venice could be permanently underwater. So, if you've ever wanted to visit, maybe don't wait too long. 14. Indonesia has more volcanoes than any other country. If you love volcanoes, Indonesia is the place to be, or maybe the place to avoid. It has more than 130 active volcanoes, the highest number of any country on Earth. This is because Indonesia sits on the Ring of Fire, the Pacific region known for its earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and tectonic madness. In fact, one of the most infamous eruptions in history, Krakatoa, 1883, happened here. It was so powerful that the explosion was heard over 3,000 miles away, and it changed global temperatures for years. 15. The Himalayas are still growing taller. Every year. Now, you'd think mountains just stay the same height, but nope, the Himalayas are still growing. Because India's tectonic plate is constantly colliding with the Eurasian plate, the Himalayas rise by about 5 millimeters every year. That might not sound like much, but over thousands of years? These mountains just keep getting taller. If this keeps up, Mount Everest could be even higher for future climbers. 16. Mount Etna is Europe's most active volcano. If you thought Europe was safe from volcanoes, think again. Sicily's Mount Etna is the most active volcano in Europe, and it's still very much alive. This fiery giant erupts almost every year, sometimes multiple times in a year. In fact, in 2021, it erupted so much that it actually grew in height, temporarily due to accumulating lava. Nature just casually adds a few extra meters like it's no big deal. 17. The Ring of Fire has 75% of the world's active volcanoes. Remember the Ring of Fire I mentioned earlier? Well, it's home to about 75% of all the active volcanoes on Earth. It's a horseshoe-shaped zone around the Pacific Ocean where tectonic plates are constantly crashing into each other, leading to earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and tsunamis. This is why countries like Japan, Indonesia, Chile, and the west coast of the US experience so many natural disasters. They're literally sitting on Earth's most chaotic fault lines. 18. San Marino is the oldest constitutional republic in the world. You've probably never heard much about San Marino, but it's one of the most interesting places in Europe. This tiny country that is completely surrounded by Italy is the oldest constitutional republic on Earth, having been established in 301 AD. It has survived wars, invasions, and centuries of political turmoil without losing its independence. 19. Greenland has no official forests. Even though Greenland is massive, it has no natural forests. Most of the island is covered in ice, with only small patches of tundra and a few scattered trees in the south. But there is no real, dense forest, which makes sense when you realize 80% of Greenland is just one giant ice sheet. 20. Machu Picchu was completely unknown to the outside world. Until 1911. You'd think something as grand as Machu Picchu would have been famous for centuries, right? Nope. This ancient Incan city sat hidden in the Peruvian mountains for hundreds of years until an explorer, Hiram Bingham, stumbled upon it in 1911. Before that, locals knew about it, but the outside world had zero clue it even existed. 21. Iceland has no McDonald's. Everywhere you go, there's usually a McDonald's, except Iceland. In 2009, Iceland's last McDonald's shut down, and the country never reopened another one. Why? This is mostly because of economic reasons, but honestly, Icelanders just didn't care for fast food the way other countries do. 22. The Gulf of Mexico has the largest dead zone on Earth. No, not a zombie apocalypse zone, but an ocean dead zone. The Gulf of Mexico has the largest dead zone in the world. A massive area where no marine life can survive because of pollution and low oxygen levels. It's basically an underwater wasteland, and it's spreading due to climate change and farming runoff. If we're not careful, the ocean might turn into one giant no-fish zone. 23. Italy is shaped exactly like a boot. And it's not a coincidence. Italy's shape is so perfect it looks like someone designed it in Photoshop. But it turns out, this boot-like shape actually influenced Italy's history. The long, narrow shape made it easy for Rome to expand and control different regions, and the coastline made trade with the Mediterranean super convenient. So yeah, Italy's shape isn't just fun to look at, it played a huge role in its power. 24. Antarctica is the driest, coldest, and windiest continent. Antarctica isn't just cold, but it's the coldest place on Earth, with temperatures dropping below -128 degrees Fahrenheit, -89 degrees Celsius. It's also the driest place on Earth. Parts of Antarctica haven't seen rain or snow in millions of years. So even though it's covered in ice, it technically qualifies as a desert. Oh, and don't forget the winds. Antarctica's storms can hit 200 miles per hour, which is basically like standing inside a jet engine. 25. The national anthem of Greece has 158 verses, and no one knows them all. Most national anthems are short and sweet, just a few verses to get the patriotic vibes going. But Greece took things to a whole new level. Their national anthem, Hymn to Liberty, has a whopping 158 verses. That's not just a song, it's a whole novel set to music. Now, here's the fun part. No one in Greece has memorized all 158 verses. Even during official ceremonies, they usually just sing the first two. Imagine having to sing the whole thing at a football match. It would last longer than the actual game. 26. Only 2% of Australians live in the inland areas. Everyone else stays near the coast. Australia is huge, covering almost 3 million square miles. But here's the weird thing. Only about 2% of Australians live in the massive inland areas. Most of the population is packed into the coastal cities, especially in just 6 capital cities like Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane. Why? Because the interior of Australia is basically a giant dry desert. And if you think you can just wander into the outback freely, think again. Some of these regions are so remote that they have no roads, no water, and barely any human contact. It's almost like an entirely separate world within a country. 27. The Seikan Tunnel in Japan is the longest land tunnel built by humans, 73 kilometers. When people talk about long tunnels, they usually bring up the Channel Tunnel, which connects the UK and France. But guess what? Japan has one that's even longer. The Seikan Tunnel runs underwater and connects the Japanese islands of Hokkaido and Honshu. It's 73 kilometers, 45 miles long, making it the longest land rail tunnel in the world. And just to make things clear and even cooler, the tunnel had to be built under the ocean floor, through some of the most unstable earthquake-prone zones on Earth. Because, you know, Japan never does anything the easy way. 28. The Channel Tunnel connects the UK and France, but it couldn't keep the UK in the EU. Speaking of long tunnels, let's talk about the Channel Tunnel, the famous train tunnel that runs under the English Channel, connecting the United Kingdom and France. At 50.5 kilometers, 31.4 miles long, it's an engineering marvel. It lets you travel from London to Paris in just over 2 hours. But while it physically connects the UK to Europe, it couldn't stop Brexit from happening. Despite this massive infrastructure link, the UK still decided to leave the European Union in 2016. So yeah, the tunnel keeps the trains running, but it couldn't keep the politics together. 29. Continents move at the same speed as your fingernails grow. You probably think of continents as fixed, unmovable landmasses, but the truth is they're constantly on the move. Thanks to plate tectonics, continents shift at roughly the same rate that your fingernails grow, that is about 1 to 2 inches, 2.5 to 5 centimeters, per year. That doesn't sound like much, but over millions of years it adds up. For example, about 250 million years ago, all the land on Earth was joined together in a massive supercontinent called Pangaea. But as the plates drifted apart, they slowly formed the continents we know today. And guess what? They're still drifting. 30th. Mount Thor in Canada has Earth's greatest sheer vertical drop. Most people think of Mount Everest when it comes to extreme mountains, but let's talk about a lesser-known, insanely steep mountain, Mount Thor in Canada. Located on Baffin Island in the Arctic, Mount Thor has the greatest sheer vertical drop on Earth, a 4,101-foot vertical cliff. That's over 4 times the height of the Eiffel Tower. Here's something that's even more surprising. If you took one step off the edge, you would fall nearly a mile straight down before hitting anything. Because of its extreme vertical face, Mount Thor has become a legendary spot for climbers and base jumpers. But conquering it is no joke. This mountain is as dangerous as it is breathtaking. So, while Everest might be the highest, Thor is the steepest, proving once again that Canada doesn't play around when it comes to epic landscapes. If you love weird, mind-bending facts like these, stick around because trust me, there's way more where that came from. See you in the next of Earth Basics. Until then, keep enjoying the videos.